So, they do work. What's going on, everyone? Jax here, and today I'm with the 2021 BMW X5 xDrive 45e, which is just a stupid name. Now, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on the exterior of this BMW X5, mainly because this is one of the cars in BMW's lineup that they haven't totally ruined the look of yet. In fact, this particular X5 looks relatively handsome with kind of crisp and clean lines, these really cool looking 21-inch M Sport wheels, and a somewhat normal sized front grille. It kind of helps that, in my opinion, the X5 looks very sort of right-sized, both from the exterior appearance and from the way it drives behind the wheel. There are almost no visual cues that distinguish this e-hybrid model's sort of EV capabilities from the regular models, which sort of appeals to some people. And the LED lighting all around is kind of minimalistic and cool looking in a BMW sort of way. Also, the headlights say laser on them, which is freaking great. I have no idea how that technology works. All I know is that I want my headlights to say laser on them.
Frickin' laser beam!
Okay, but under the hood, this is where things get interesting. The 2021 X5 in this trim has a 3-liter turbocharged straight six, making 282 horsepower and 331 pound-feet of torque, which is pretty healthy. But combine that with an electric motor, making 111 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque, and you get a total output of 389 horsepower and 443 pound-feet of torque, which is good for a 0 to 60 time of 4.7 seconds. That's pretty fast any way you slice it, and it makes this 5,600-pound midsize SUV slightly faster than my C5 Corvette, as well as pretty much faster than almost every other midsize luxury SUV, you know, like normal trims, not like crazy AMG and M and stuff. Stay away from the Porsche Cayenne. Okay, it's faster than some of them, like a lot of them. Yes, the X5 weighs 5,600 pounds, which is like roughly the same size as the moon.
That's no moon.
So when you deploy its full acceleration capabilities, it's actually kind of shocking. At least the first time you experience it. Maybe every time you experience it. But how does all of this synthesize in the driving experience? So here we are with the 2021 BMW X5 xDrive 45e, which is a stupid name. Seriously, anything that takes me longer than like 2 seconds to say doesn't need to be a thing. Unless, of course, it's like a Lamborghini or something. But like, you know, a luxury SUV, no. And right off the bat, one of the defining characteristics of this BMW X5, the minute I jumped behind the wheel on the very first day, was how incredibly seamless the driving characteristics are of this like hybrid system. It is, and I know BMW probably won't appreciate me comparing it to this, but it is like a really super nice and refined Toyota RAV4 Prime. Everything about the driving experience is really kind of sublimely integrated to give you that BMW kind of Germanic feel while still providing the capabilities of this EV driving range, 31 miles of EV driving range. But the way that it shuffles power has that sort of sophistication that I think Toyota kind of pioneered. And it's really cool to see one of the German luxury makers kind of adopt that same strategy and make it work in sort of the kind of playing field in which this car competes. The new straight six engine sounds great at wide open throttle. It has that sort of BMW characteristic straight six kind of vibe to it. It's awfully quiet. I mean, the ride in general in here is extremely quiet, extremely isolated. It definitely feels very like luxurious in a much different league. I had the Kia Sorento last week, which is honestly, very similar to this vehicle in sort of size and shape and all that kind of stuff. And this feels a noticeable step above that in terms of sort of the sophistication of the ride and handling, and as well as the interior ambiance and quiet. Similarly, the 8-speed automatic transmission is invisible and telepathic, which are two wonderful characteristics of an 8-speed automatic in the sort of luxury classes. It is stellar in its behavior, and you don't even notice it going about its business. Now, we're on the handling road right here, and I'm driving in regular mode because this car does have adaptive dampers and air springs, but most people are gonna drive it like this. So we're going over this first rough patch, and I would point out that the ride in this X5 sort of hybrid is very soft. Coming around the first turn here, it controls its roll a lot better than something like the Sorento did on a similar road. And in general, the ride is similar to the Sorento in sort of cushiness, but it is much more kind of refined and controlled. So that's that difference you get in, buying something like a BMW. So we're still getting that very soft ride, but the Sorrento's ride verged on wallowy, which is not my favorite characteristic of a car. This feels much more controlled. The body control, the lack of head toss, far more sophisticated than the Sorrento's ride. Keep saying sophisticated. Big bump is coming up right here in a second. There it is. Very impressive considering this car is riding on 21-inch M Sport wheels wrapped in Pirelli P0 tires. Quite large Pirelli P0 tires with very small sidewalls. So the comfort in this car is pretty insane when you consider that you're getting the visual awesomeness of those 21-inch wheels with almost zero penalty in ride quality and a noticeable improvement in handling. So I call that a win-win. I'm not saying you should spend the extra money on them, but I would. Now, what about the driving interface? Well, the throttle is pretty much perfect. It gives you the exact precise amount of power that you need and want, which is especially helpful because right now I've got 16 miles of EV left and I'm just trying to keep it in EV mode. Why waste the mileage? I'm gonna get as much of this in electric mode as possible while I'm doing this review. So I like the sensitivity of the throttle. The brake pedal feels kind of like a hybrid brake pedal. It's good in its sort of precision, but it has a mushy kind of feel to it. I like the aggressiveness of sort of the regen, how when you take your foot off the gas, it will, especially at lower speeds, it'll pretty aggressively brake down to recapture some energy. But at very low speeds, like highway creeping, it can get a little grabby and a little out of sorts. It's not the end of the world. It's definitely not any different than most hybrids like this. So, it's just something to be aware of. Didn't really bother me at all. On that note, EV mode is very satisfying. I like that you can sort of monitor it in the gauges. I know the gauges aren't everybody's favorite, but it does give you the ability to really monitor EV mode. And one of the cool things about this car that I'll show you guys in a second is that in sport mode, kind of like the Prime, I hate to keep referencing it, but there's a lot of similarities here. It sort of uses that electric power to boost the speed of the vehicle, giving you that really satisfying 430 pound-feet of torque. So when you are going 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds in this vehicle, it's just crazy quick. It's just so impressive at how fast this 5,600 pound family SUV can get up to speed, and it's also a lot of fun. The steering in hybrid mode here it's got a pleasant heft to it. It's really numb though. There's not a lot of feel. I know BMW's kind of gotten beat up on their lack of steering sort of feel the past couple years. Sport mode is maybe better, but it's just really heftier and more precise. Although I love this wheel. The BMW wheels are so cartoonishly thick. I just love it. I love that they're like, we'll give you all the wheel. I'm gonna put it in sport mode. And let's have a little fun. This should not be able to do this. We're already past 60 miles an hour. We're gonna dial it back here. But that 8-speed just is like, oh, I see what you're about, and just dumps it. I mean, it's really quite absurd. But it's really satisfying too. I like that you can get all of this hybrid capability and all that in such a still capable performance SUV. I mean, look, if the Germans are gonna make all these SUVs perform this way, you might as well get the best of both worlds. It's what I really like about this vehicle. And I will point out on that note that sport mode, it does firm up the dampers. It does lower the car a bit on the air springs, and it feels like a much more aggressive SUV. Kind of what I was saying about that best of both worlds. It's like right now I'm in hybrid mode, and as I said, the ride is incredibly soft, but pretty well controlled. But in sport mode, you start to get some of that road texture, that feedback. The damping is a lot firmer and more aggressive. It's not, you know, like a super sports car, but there is a noticeable difference. And when you're going around a corner at high speeds, keep in mind, you're on 315 width tires in the back, P0 summer rubber. So like, this thing can actually go around corners combined with its obnoxious level of speed. And you're sitting here going, oh, dang it, these freaking SUVs are, they're just getting too good. They're just getting so good. And I hate it, but like, you know, I mean, if I'm gonna get a car and drive around the family and I, you know, work close to where we live and I don't wanna waste gas, suddenly something like this becomes a really compelling proposition. And I think that kind of sums up the driving experience of the X5 in general. Everything about this is just sort of catering to its mission of kind of doing everything really well. It might not be exceptionally insane, like when you get into the M or the AMG versions of like the German SUVs that kind of defy the laws of physics, or like the Lamborghini Urus and Porsche Cayenne, you know, depending on what part of the world you're from. I'm from the South, so who knows, you know, my pronunciations can get whack at any minute. But this vehicle as a daily driver, that 31-mile EV range really kind of makes a case for itself here, because I'm able to charge this off just a regular 120 outlet. I'm able to do a lot of my daily driving in EV mode. I can switch it over to sport mode, and I can get that punch when I want it. I've got this really incredible interior. I know people, I will say this, let me say this real quick, because I don't think I mentioned this later in the interior thing. I ragged on the gauges a little bit, but I know a lot of people kind of dog BMW for the fact that their interiors look largely the same, basically as they did like 40 years ago. But there's a functionality to this interior. I will continue to kind of complain about the gauges. They ring the outside, and I didn't say this in the later portion, but when you're driving it, I've got a very perfect driving position going on here for someone who's 6'6". I'm very happy with the driving position. I love the steering wheel, the kind of meaty grips on it. The paddles are right here. Like, everything about this driving position is tailored to the act of driving, which is what you'd expect from a BMW. But one of the stupid things about the gauges when you're behind the wheel of the car, if you're a taller individual, is that I have the steering wheel where I want it. This is where I want the steering wheel. And the rim partially obscures the outer edges of the gauges because they're pushed so freaking far out in the instrument binnacle. And I think that's just stupid. It's like in an interior that's this catered to driving and the driver, why would you have such an egregious fault, especially for tall people? Because the part of me that's tall is the German side of my family. But what I was saying about the interior looking largely the same, there is a functionality to this that I now have a greater appreciation for, and I'm being dead serious. On day one of driving this car this week, I had pretty much tailored everything the way I wanted it. The hard buttons and stuff are all exactly where you need them to be to instantly access the climate control. You've got your volume knob. iDrive is pretty fantastic, to be honest with you. And so this sort of similarity of look, I would call it more of a functionality. So I'm gonna chill on my criticism of BMW in that department, but I will continue to criticize these gauges because I think they're kind of dumb. Now, this portion of my drive home is where they've literally just wrecked the road. It needs to be completely repaved, and they've just done patchwork on it. And the isolation in this cabin, the fact that in almost any other mainstream car, I'm going down this road and the audible impact of the poor surface is messing up my sound quality, and the vibrations are ruining my camera shots. You might see a little vibration in these shots, but I imagine it's acceptable when I'm driving a car. But I had to literally stop filming in the Sorrento last week because the camera was shaking so much. And it wasn't because the car had a bad structure, it was transmitting that much vibration into the cabin. And you don't get any of that in this car, especially in regular mode. In sport mode, maybe, but not in regular mode. This has a very impressive dual personality for a vehicle that's probably going to be sort of a secondary family daily driver. It's not going to be your giant SUV that you take on vacation, but it's going to be one of your sort of spouses, you or your spouse's daily drivers that you need to be functional and kind of do all the things. And BMW has made a really good case for this X5 hybrid. I don't think a regular one with its more, powerful engine, technically this engine is less fuel efficient if you don't have all the EV range, so you might want to keep it charged up. That's a little pro tip. But I don't think some of the mega SUVs, if you just want to throw the money away because you don't care, that's one thing. But if you're really driving this every single day and you do have a mind of saving a couple dollars at the pump, this makes a ton of sense and has a better range overall and EV than pretty much anything else in the class. It's a standout vehicle. Now, I don't think anyone's buying the BMW X5 to be their family vacation hauler. It's just not big enough for something like that. You do get 33 cubic feet of cargo space back here, which is pretty good for the class. And the 17 kilowatt hour battery pack only costs you about 1 cubic foot of space, which is pretty good, and that's kind of a win-win. As a two-row midsize SUV, it's really about on par with everything from sort of mainstream SUVs all the way up to the luxury competition. So 33 cubic feet is basically average. It also keeps its little sort of rear tailgate split, which I personally like, but maybe that's not for everyone. I kind of think it's cool, although I'm not 100% sure it's rated for 235 pounds, so let's move on. Inside the X5, there are some pros and cons, with the main pro being the sort of interior materials and the build quality in general. Keep in mind that this particular model stickers for over $80,000 before the federal tax credit, so it had better be pretty nice. And in the case of this particular X5, nearly everything your hand touches is high quality leather, soft touch, plastics, actual metal, and in the case of the shifter in this one, glass. Which you didn't know you wanted until now. I didn't know I wanted it until now, but now I kind of want it. The seats are sort of oddly comfortable. What I mean is, when I first got into the car on the very first day they dropped it off, I didn't feel like I could really kind of dial in my seating position the way I wanted. I could get the perfect driving position, but I wasn't quite sure about the backrest. But the Germans, they knew better than I. And at the end of the week, I had no stiffness or soreness, and my messed up back didn't develop any of its little pressure points. So they were right and I was wrong. The tech in here is also very impressive. iDrive has morphed from a ambitious but completely unintuitive mess of an infotainment system into one of the most intuitive and sort of logical infotainment systems on the market, period, especially among the luxury brands. iDrive is, I don't want to say it's the standard, but man, if it's not the standard, it's close. And this 12.3-inch infotainment display runs through the iDrive controller, but it's also touch sensitive and fairly rapid in its responses. So the nice thing about this BMW interior is it gives you many different ways to interact with it, and they're all pretty seamless and quick. I was able to set this X5 up in pretty much exactly the way I wanted it the day that it arrived in my driveway. It only took me a few minutes to access all the controls and features that I was interested in, and it still retains the hard buttons for important things like climate control and volume control. So I really like the balance of BMW's infotainment system. And because the interior materials are so nice, I really like this BMW interior overall. So, what are the drawbacks in this X5? Well, the main one, as you can see here, is interior space, more specifically rear seat space. I had the Kia Sorento last week, which is approximately the same size as the X5. It's a midsize SUV, and I could fit behind myself without too much trouble. That's not necessarily possible in the X5. See, the rear seat is not really adjustable, so there's really nothing I can do about that. And while I am unusually tall at 6'6", being able to sit behind myself in a vehicle is kind of a good measure of a vehicle's space efficiency. One of the other negatives is that the 12.3-inch digital gauge cluster, while crisp with attractive graphics, is kind of a bit of a jumble in terms of information. I don't think a lot of people enjoy BMW's gauge cluster look these days, not just because they're kind of unattractive, but it's sort of the positioning of vital information, namely, speed and engine RPM and things like that, is on the outer edge of the cluster, which makes it sort of visually inconvenient. That does allow you to have the navigation map and directions and media stuff in the center of the screen. And the way it sort of fades out is kind of cool, where it's like there and it kind of fades as it gets to the outer edges. That's neat, but the majority of the information on display is just a bit of a mess, especially in hybrid mode, where it's trying to give you additional information on top of the normal information. So there's that. And in a car that costs over $80,000, why is there no surround view camera? I know the Germans like to put things behind a sort of paywall from time to time, but this thing is nearly fully loaded. Why doesn't it have a surround view camera? And wireless Apple CarPlay, while always appreciated, did just sort of decide to disconnect every once in a while. It was like, I'm kind of done with you, and just turned off. But to be fair to BMW, that's a problem that I've encountered on nearly any car from any manufacturer with wireless CarPlay. So I wouldn't really hold that against them here. But should any of that stuff prevent you from buying a BMW X5? Well, in my opinion, no. So, as I usually ask, should you buy a BMW X5 xDrive 45e, even though it has a stupid name?
Say my name.
No, I'm not saying your name again. Anyway, yes, there are a lot of compelling reasons to buy this particular X5. Chief among them, this is the world's best RAV4 Prime, which is, of course, itself a phenomenal everyday SUV. To see how phenomenal, check out my review, link in the description. Like the RAV4 Prime, if your daily commute or errands stay within this X5's 31 miles of range, you can accomplish quite a lot before even consuming a single drop of fuel. I was able to make it to work and back home without even coming close to the 31 miles of EV range. Now, I'm lucky I work pretty close to my house, and I was able to recapture almost a full charge overnight on just a regular 120 outlet. It also lets you see how much power you can draw from your home's sort of electrical network, which is nice, I guess. As a daily driver, this X5 is pretty complete with all of the aforementioned EV benefits, along with, well, this particular model's rather luxurious features, such as heated seats, front and rear, a panoramic sunroof with LED accent lighting, a head-up display, 4-zone climate control, as well as BMW's gesture control, which I will admit I have mocked numerous times in the past. And I still think it's a total gimmick, don't get me wrong, but it does make for kind of a cool party trick, you know? Hey guys, want me to turn up the volume? Blue, 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 blue. It went up. Wow. Crazy. Overall, the X5 in its sort of hybrid trim makes for a pretty great midsize SUV. It is perfectly pleasant, if not slightly sporty to drive. It is appropriately luxurious for the price, and the integration of its hybrid powertrain technology is utterly seamless. It also happens to be downright fast. And if you can hold off on some of the superfluous options, the $7,500 federal tax credit brings the price into a pretty reasonable range for a midsize luxury SUV. While this one was loaded up to over 80 grand, the I promised I wasn't gonna say that again. The freaking hybrid X5 starts at just around 64. Add just a few desirable options, subtract the $7,500 federal tax credit, and it all adds up to a pretty well-equipped luxury SUV that might squeak in under $70,000. And one that could return very real fuel savings depending on your use case. I call that a win-win. And on top of all of it, it's actually not hideous. Guys, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I think this X-Drive hybrid, whatever you want to call it, its dumb name, is actually a really interesting vehicle because it's sort of taking this hybrid technology pioneered by something like the RAV4, the sort of plug-in hybrid for people that maybe don't want to go full EV, but would like to enjoy some sort of tangible benefits of an EV lifestyle, depending on where they work and play. I think it is a really interesting option. And because BMW has now raised the EV range to 31 miles, this thing suddenly becomes a lot more practical and a lot more useful. And the fact that it retains so many of its sporty driving dynamics and characteristics and its outright straight line speed makes it a very impressive package. So I would encourage you to check one of these out if you think that hybrid range would work for you. If you don't think 31 miles is enough for you, I don't think you'd be all that impressed with the benefits. And as I mentioned in the driving portion, the fuel economy on the straight six in this model is actually worse when you take the hybrid electric engine powertrain out of the equation. So give it a shot if you think it'll work for you. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Maybe don't option it up to $80,000. But until next time, ride safe, drive safe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're new here, please consider joining this growing community of car and motorcycle enthusiasts. I hope you have a good one. Tune in for the next review next week, and I'll see you soon. Peace. I do so love when people come up here to practice riding motorcycles. Whatever that guy's doing. Was that fart audible on the microphone? Oh my gosh. Do you have to have tires that obnoxious on your truck? I bet you've never gone off-road in your life. I bet you've never even gotten it dirty. How does it get louder the further away it gets? Go roll coal on somebody, bud.